Tuesday, 1st of August, 1944. Dear Kitty, little bundle of contradictions. That's how I ended my last letter, and that's how I'm going to begin this one. A little bundle of contradictions. Can you tell me exactly what it is? What does contradiction mean? Like so many words, it can mean two things: contradiction from without and contradiction from within. The first is the ordinary, not giving in easily, always knowing best, getting in the last word, in fin. All the unpleasant qualities from which I'm renowned. For the second, nobody knows about. That's my own secret. I've already told you before that I have, as it were, a dual personality. One half embodies my exuberant cheerfulness, making fun of everything, my high-spiritedness, and above all, the way I take everything lightly. This includes not taking offense at a flirtation, a kiss, an embrace, a dirty joke. This side is usually lying in wait and pushes away the other, which is much better, deeper, and purer. You must realize that no one knows Anne's better side, and that's why most people find me so insufferable. Certainly, I'm a giddy clown for one afternoon, but then everyone's had enough of me for another month. Really, it's just the same as a love film is for deep-thinking people, simply a diversion, amusing just for once, something which is soon forgotten, not bad, but certainly not good. I loathe having to tell you this, but why shouldn't I, if I know it's true anyway? My lighter, superficial side will always be too quick for the deeper side of me, and that's why it will always win. You can't imagine how often I've already tried to push this Anne away, to cripple her, to hide her, because after all, she's only half of what's called Anne. But it doesn't work, and I know, too, why it doesn't work. I'm awfully scared that everyone who knows me as I always am will discover that I have another side, a finer and better side. I'm afraid they'll laugh at me, that think I'm ridiculous and sentimental, not take me seriously. I'm used to not being taken seriously, but it's only the light-hearted Anne that's used to it and can bear it. The deeper Anne is too frail for it. Sometimes I really compel the good Anne to take the stage for a quarter of an hour. She simply shrivels up as soon as she has to speak, and lets Anne number one take over, and before I realize it, she has disappeared. Therefore, the nice Anne is never present in company, has not appeared one single time so far, but almost always predominates when we're alone. I know exactly how I'd like to be, how I am too, inside. But alas, I'm only like that for myself, and perhaps that's why, no, I'm sure it's the reason why, I say I've got a happy nature within, and why other people think I've got a happy nature without. I am guided by the pure Anne within, but outside I'm nothing but a frolicsome little goat who's broken loose. As I've already said, I never utter my real feelings about anything, and that's how I've acquired the name of chase after boys, flirt, know-all, reader of love stories. The cheerful Anne laughs about it, gives cheeky answers, shrugs her shoulders indifferently, behaves as if she doesn't care. But oh dearie me, the quiet Anne's reactions are just the opposite. If I'm to be quite honest, then I must admit that it does hurt me, that I try terribly hard to change myself, but that I'm always fighting against a more powerful enemy. A voice sobs within me. There you are, that's what's become of you. You're uncharitable, you look supercilious and peevish. People dislike you, and all because you won't listen to the advice given you by your own better half. Oh, I would like to listen, but it doesn't work. If I'm quiet and serious, everyone thinks it's a new comedy, and then I have to get out of it by turning it into a joke, not to mention my own family, who are sure to think I'm ill, make me swallow pills for headaches and nerves, feel my neck and my head to see whether I'm running a temperature, ask if I'm constipated, and criticize me for being in a bad mood. I can't keep that up. If I'm watched to that extent, I start by getting snappy, then unhappy, and finally I twist my heart round again so that the bad is on the outside and the good is on the inside, and keep on trying to find a way of becoming what I would so like to be, and what I could be if there weren't any other people living in the world. Yours, Anne. Afterward. Anne Frank's diary ends here. It is a work utterly complete in itself, and its eloquence requires no further comment. But the experiences Anne described became perhaps even more meaningful when seen in their immediate historical context. It is the purpose of this brief afterword to provide at least the outlines of the context, and to bring Anne's own story to its conclusion. On August 4th, 1944, following information provided by a Dutch informer, the Gestapo penetrated into the Franks' hiding place. The 8 Jews, together with Mr. Kufus and Mr. Crawler, were taken to Gestapo headquarters in Amsterdam. After a few weeks' imprisonment, Mr. Kufus was released for medical care. Mr. Crawler spent 8 months in a forced labor camp. The Franks, the Van Dans, and Mr. Dussel were sent to Westport. On September 3rd, the day the Allies captured Brussels, these 8 were among the last shipment of 1,000 Jews to leave Holland. The prisoners were herded aboard a freight train, 75 people to a car. The cars, each with only a small, barred window high on one side, were sealed. For 3 days and nights the train wandered eastward across Germany, often stopping, backing, detouring. On the 3rd night, it reached Auschwitz in Poland. In the glare of searchlights, watched by black-uniformed SS men tightly reining their police dogs, the Jews left the train. On the platform, men and women were separated. It was the last Otto Frank saw of his family. At Auschwitz, the healthier prisoners, their heads shaved, worked 12 hours a day digging sod, driven relentlessly by the sadistic kapos, criminals who served the SS as labor overseers. At night they were locked into crowded barracks. Outside the windows they could see the sky glow red above the crematories. Through the research of Ernest Schnabel, a German writer whose book Anne Frank, A Portrait in Courage, was published in 1958, some of the events of the last few months of Anne's life have been reconstructed. Auschwitz, a former inmate, told Mr. Schnabel, was a fantastically well-organized spick-and-span hell. The food was bad, but it was distributed regularly. We kept our barracks so clean that you could have eaten off the floor. Anyone who died in the barracks was taken away first thing in the morning. Anyone who fell ill disappeared also. Those who were gassed did not scream. They just were no longer there. The crematories smoked, but we received our rations and had roll calls. The SS harassed us at roll call and kept guard with machine guns from the watchtowers, and the camp fences were charged with high tension, electricity, but we could wash every day and sometimes even take showers. If you forget the gas chambers, you could manage to live. The prisoners were moved like sleepwalkers, half dead, protected somehow from seeing anything, from feeling anything. But Anne had no such protection. Another survivor recalled, "I can still see her standing at the door and looking down the camp street as a herd of naked gypsy girls were driven by the crematory, and Anne watched them go and cried. And she cried also when we marched past the Hungarian children who had already been waiting half a day in the rain in front of the gas chambers, because it was not yet their turn. And Anne nudged me and said, 'Look, look, their eyes.'" In October 1944, Anne, Margot, and Mrs. Van Daan were among a group of the youngest and strongest women selected to be moved to Beslan in Germany. Left alone, refusing to eat, her mind wandering, Mrs. Frank died in an infirmary barracks at Auschwitz on January 6, 1945. Otto Frank in the men's camp saw Mr. Van Daan taken off to be gassed. Mr. Dussel was sent back to Germany and died in the Neuengamme camp. When the SS abandoned Auschwitz in February 1945 to escape the advancing Russians, they took Peter Van Daan with them on the winter march to the west. He was never heard from again. Otto Frank survived to be liberated by the Russians. Belsen, Anne discovered, was different from Auschwitz. There was no organization, no roll call, no food or water, only the barren, frozen heath and the starving people looking like ghosts. By January 1945, the Allies had reached the Rhine, but at Belsen, typhus raged and hope was dead. At Belsen, Anne found her school friend Lise Goosen. "I waited, shivering in the darkness," Lise related of the night when Anne was brought to her. It took a long time, but suddenly I heard a voice. Lize? Lize? Where are you? It was Anne, and I ran in the direction of the voice, and then I saw her beyond the barbed wire. She was in rags. I saw her emaciated, sunken face in the darkness. Her eyes were very large. We cried and cried, for now there was only the barbed wire between us, nothing more, and no longer any difference in our fates. I told Anne that my mother had died and my father was dying, and Anne told me that she knew nothing about her father, but that her mother had stayed behind in Auschwitz. Only Margot was still with her, but she was already very sick. They had met up with Mrs. Van Daan again only after their arrival here in Belsen. Mrs. Van Daan died at Belsen, but no witness marked the date. Margot died at the end of February or beginning of March 1945. Anne, who was already sick at the time, recalled a survivor, was not informed of her sister's death, but after a few days she sensed it, and soon afterwards she died, peacefully, feeling that nothing bad was happening to her. She was not yet 16. In May 1945, the war ended. Months later, Otto Frank returned to Amsterdam by way of Odessa and Marseilles. Miep and Eli gave him the notebooks and papers in Anne's handwriting that they had found strewn over the floor of the secret annex after the Gestapo had gone. These were Anne's diaries, stories, and sketches. They were all that remained. At first, Otto Frank had copies of the diary privately circulated as a memorial to his family. It was a Dutch university professor who urged formal publication of the book, and with only slight excisions by Mr. Frank, Het Actress, the secret annex, was published in Amsterdam by Contact Publishers in June 1947. The book soon went through several editions. In 1950, it was published in Germany by the Heidelberg firm of Lambert Schneider. The first printing was only 4,500 copies, and many booksellers were actually afraid to show it in their windows. But the book caught on so rapidly, and sales of the pocket edition published by S. Fischer Verlag totaled 900,000. In 1950, the diary was published in France, in 1952 in England, and the United States under the title Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. Now, 20 years after its original publication, the book has been translated into 31 languages, including Bengali, Sloven, and Esperanto. It has been published in 30 countries and has sold more than 1 million copies in hardcover alone. In the United States, the diary and the works of Anne Frank, both published by Doubleday and Company, have sold well over 150,000 copies, and the pocketbook edition of the diary has sold almost 4 million copies. The diary was also distributed by the Teenage Book Club and the Bookfind Club, and was reprinted in the Modern Library. It was serialized by an American newspaper syndicated with an estimated audience of 10 million readers, and million more read it when it was condensed in omnibook and compact magazines. A German translation of the book has been used in the United States as a school reader, and a large type edition has been published by Frank Watts Incorporated. In 1955, a play by Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, based on the diary and called simply The Diary of Anne Frank, opened at the Cott Theater in New York. A great success, it receives a Pulitzer Prize, the Critics' Circle Prize, and the Antoinette Perry Award for 1956. On October 1, 1956, The Diary of Anne Frank opened simultaneously in 7 German cities. Audiences there greeted it in stunned silence. The play released a wave of emotions that finally broke through the silence with which Germans had treated the Nazi period. For the first time there were widespread expressions of guilt and shame for what Germans had done to the Jews only a few years before. In Amsterdam, Queen Juliana attended the play's opening on November 27th. This was the city where the events of the play had actually occurred, and many Netherlanders who had lost families and friends in the extermination of the Dutch Jews were in the audience. There were audible sobs, the New York Times correspondent reported, and one strangled cry as the drama struck its climax and conclusion, the sound of the Germans hammering at the door and the hideout. The audience sat in silence for several minutes after the curtain went down and then rose as the royal party left. There was no applause. Continue on